The fluorescent lights in the executive boardroom cast long shadows across the polished mahogany table. Martin Chen sat at the head, his fingers pressed against his temples, surrounded by some of the brightest minds his company had hired. They had been at it for 6 hours straight, and still, no one had an answer. The problem was simple to describe but impossible to solve. Their new pharmaceutical packaging line had a critical flaw. Somewhere in the automated system, random bottles were slipping through without their safety seals. The implications were catastrophic. Not only could it cost them hundreds of millions in recalls and lawsuits, but people's lives were at stake. Martin had built Medicorp from nothing over 30 years. He had started in a garage with a chemistry set and a dream, and now they employed over 2,000 people. But tonight, all of that felt fragile. One executive after another had proposed solutions, each more expensive and complex than the last. Nothing seemed quite right. It was nearly midnight when Martin finally called for a break. His team filed out, exhausted and defeated. He stayed behind, staring at the architectural drawings and technical specifications scattered across the table. Somewhere in all this complexity, there had to be a simple answer. There always was. That is what his father used to tell him. The best solutions are often the simplest ones. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Thomas Williams stood in the doorway, pushing his cleaning cart. He was in his mid-50s, with silver hair and kind eyes that seemed to carry both weariness and wisdom. Martin had seen him around for years, always arriving after everyone else had gone home, always with a friendly nod and a quiet word. "Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Chen," Thomas said gently. "I can come back later if you need more time." "No, please come in," Martin said, rubbing his tired eyes. "I should probably get out of your way anyway." Thomas began his routine, emptying trash bins and wiping down surfaces with the same careful attention he gave every room. Martin watched him work, appreciating the quiet dignity in his movements. There was something calming about Thomas's presence, something that made the impossible problems of the day feel a little less overwhelming. "Long night?" Thomas asked softly, not looking up from his work. Martin let out a long sigh. "You could say that. We have a problem at one of our facilities. A big one. And despite having some of the best engineers and consultants money can buy, we cannot seem to figure it out." Thomas nodded thoughtfully, continuing to clean. Sometimes when you are too close to something, you cannot see the simple answer right in front of you. Martin smiled tiredly. "My father used to say something similar." They fell into a comfortable silence. Thomas moved to the whiteboard where someone had sketched out the packaging line system. He paused, studying it while wiping down the frame. "This your problem?" he asked quietly. "Part of it," Martin replied. "We have an automated line that fills and seals medicine bottles. But some bottles are getting through without their safety seals. We cannot figure out where in the process it is happening, and every solution we come up with costs millions and takes months to implement." Thomas was quiet for a moment, still looking at the diagram. Then he set down his cloth and spoke, his voice calm and measured. "I used to work in a potato chip factory, long time ago now. We had a similar problem. Empty bags would sometimes make it through the line. Cost the company a fortune in complaints and waste." Martin found himself leaning forward, interested despite his exhaustion. "What did you do?" he asked. "Well, the engineers wanted to install all kinds of expensive sensors and computer systems," Thomas continued, a gentle smile crossing his face. "But then one of the older workers, a woman named Betty who had been there since the place opened, she suggested something so simple we all felt a bit foolish for not thinking of it ourselves." "What was it?" Martin asked, genuinely curious now. "She said, why not just put a fan at the end of the line? The empty bags would be too light, and the fan would blow them off into a reject bin. The filled bags would be heavy enough to continue through. Cost them maybe $200 and an afternoon to set up." Thomas returned to his cleaning, but Martin sat frozen, his mind racing. The simplicity of it was beautiful. And then, like a light switching on in a dark room, he saw it. The answer to their own problem, sitting there all along in plain sight. "Thomas," he said slowly, standing up from his chair. "What if we did something similar? What if we just put a scale at the end of our line? Any bottle that is even slightly too light, because it is missing the seal, gets automatically diverted. We would not need to trace the problem through the whole system." We would just catch it at the end. Thomas looked up and smiled warmly. Sounds like it might work, Mr. Chen. Sometimes the best solutions do not require us to rebuild everything. Just a little common sense at the right point. Martin felt energy surging through him despite the late hour. He grabbed his phone and started making calls, reaching out to his head of operations, his lead engineer, his plant manager. Within 20 minutes, the conference room was filling up again, but this time the mood was different. There was excitement in the air, hope where before there had been only frustration. They worked through the details quickly. A precision scale at the end of the line, calibrated to the exact weight of a properly sealed bottle. Any deviation, even by a few grams, would trigger an automatic diversion to a quality control station. It was elegant, simple, and could be implemented in days rather than months. The cost, less than $50,000 instead of the millions they had been discussing. As the team dispersed, energized and ready to implement the solution first thing in the morning, Martin realized that Thomas had quietly finished his work and slipped out. He found him 2 floors down, cleaning another office. Thomas, wait, Martin called out, slightly out of breath from jogging down the stairs. Thomas turned, that same gentle expression on his face. Yes, Mr. Chen, you just saved this company potentially hundreds of millions of dollars. More importantly, you probably saved lives. People count on our medicines being safe. I cannot thank you enough. Thomas shook his head modestly. I just shared a story, sir. You are the one who saw how it applied. That is the real skill. Even so, Martin insisted. I want to do something for you. A bonus, a promotion, anything. Name it. For a moment, something flickered across Thomas's face, vulnerability mixed with hope. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but steady. I have a daughter, Mr. Chen. Sarah. She is 16, smart as a whip, wants to be a doctor someday. But I am raising her on my own, and college, especially medical school, it seems impossible sometimes. If you really want to do something, if there is any kind of scholarship program here, or maybe an internship where she could learn about the pharmaceutical industry, that would mean more to me than anything else you could offer. Martin felt something catch in his throat. Here was a man who could have asked for anything for himself, who had every right to, and instead, he thought only of his child's future. Thomas, I am going to do better than that, Martin said. Firmly. Your daughter will have a full scholarship, all the way through medical school if that is what she wants. And yes, we will set up an internship program, not just for her but for other young people like her. Kids whose parents work hard but do not always have access to the same opportunities. He paused, then continued. But there is more. I want you to work with our operations team. Not as a janitor, as a consultant. Someone who can look at our processes with fresh eyes, someone who understands that the best solutions come from experience and common sense, not just expensive technology. You would still clean if you want to, but I think you have more to offer this company than we ever realized. Thomas's eyes glistened, and he extended his hand. Martin shook it firmly, feeling the calluses earned from years of hard work, the strength of a man who had never stopped trying to build a better life for his child. Over the following months, the solution worked perfectly. The simple scale system caught every improperly sealed bottle, and the production line ran more efficiently than ever. But more importantly, something had changed in the culture at Medicorp. Martin started a program called Common Sense Solutions, encouraging employees at every level to contribute ideas, regardless of their job title or education. Some of the best innovations came from the people on the factory floor, from the administrative assistants, from the custodial staff. People who saw the day-to-day reality of how things actually worked, not just how they were supposed to work on paper. Thomas proved to be invaluable. His decades of experience in various jobs, from factories to warehouses to office buildings, gave him insights that even the most educated consultants missed. He had a way of cutting through complexity and finding the heart of a problem. And Sarah, she flourished. She interned at Medicorp every summer, learning about pharmaceutical development, quality control, and the business side of healthcare. She met scientists and executives, but she also spent time with the people who packaged the medicines, who ensured they reached patients safely, who answered calls from worried families. She learned that every person in the chain mattered, that dignity and respect were not determined by job title. On the day Sarah graduated from high school, Martin attended the ceremony. He watched Thomas beam with pride as his daughter walked across the stage, valedictorian of her class, heading to college on a full scholarship with medical school in her sights. After the ceremony, Thomas approached Martin with tears in his eyes. "You changed our lives," Thomas said simply. Martin shook his head. "You changed mine, Thomas. You reminded me of something I had forgotten in all those years of building this company. The best answers are not always the most complicated ones. And the most valuable people are not always the ones with the impressive degrees or the corner offices. Sometimes they are the ones who show up quietly, do their work with dignity, and carry wisdom earned from really living life." He looked around at the happy graduates and their proud families. "Your potato chip story saved us millions, yes. But more than that, it saved our culture. It reminded everyone at Medicorp that good ideas can come from anywhere, and that we are all in this together." Years later, long after Martin had retired and Sarah had indeed become a doctor, people at Medicorp still told the story of the janitor who solved the $100 million problem. But those who really knew Thomas understood that the true impact went far deeper than any single solution. He had reminded them all that kindness matters, that paying attention to the people around you matters, that taking a moment to share a story or listen to someone's ideas matters. He had shown them that wisdom is not confined to boardrooms, and that sometimes the most profound changes come not from grand gestures but from simple moments of human connection. And in the end, that was worth more than any amount of money could ever measure. Sometimes the answers we are looking for are not hidden in complexity. They are waiting quietly in the wisdom of someone we just need to take a moment to truly see and hear. 5 years had passed since that night in the boardroom, and the warm September sun filtered through the windows of Medicorp's newest facility. Martin Chen stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, but today he wasn't the one holding the scissors. That honor belonged to Dr. Sarah Williams, now a resident at City General Hospital, who had helped design the community health initiative that this building represented. Thomas stood beside his daughter, his janitorial uniform replaced by a comfortable suit, though he still kept his maintenance badge pinned to his lapel. He said it reminded him where he came from and why that mattered. "I never imagined," Sarah said softly to her father before the ceremony began, "that your late-night job would lead to all this." Thomas smiled and squeezed her hand. "Life has a way of surprising us, sweetheart. I just pushed a cleaning cart and tried to be helpful. Everything else, well, that came from people choosing to be kind to each other." The facility they were opening was something entirely new for Medicorp. It was part research center, part community clinic, designed to serve the neighborhoods where people like Thomas and Sarah had lived for years. The kind of places where good healthcare felt like a luxury rather than a right. As Martin watched Sarah cut the ribbon, his mind drifted back to all the changes that one conversation had sparked. The Common Sense Solutions program had transformed the company, but it had also transformed him. He had started actually talking to people throughout the organization, learning their stories, understanding their struggles. There was Maria in accounting, who had fled a war-torn country and worked 3 jobs to support her elderly parents. Her insight about streamlining the invoice system had saved countless hours and reduced errors. There was James in shipping, a military veteran with PTSD, whose careful attention to packaging details had prevented several potential safety issues. Martin had connected him with mental health resources and watched him flourish. There was Linda in customer service, a grandmother raising 3 grandchildren, whose patience and compassion on the phone had turned angry customers into advocates and had shown the whole company what real customer care looked like. Each person had a story. Each person had value beyond their job description. Thomas had opened Martin's eyes to that truth, and it had changed everything. After the ceremony, Martin found Thomas standing alone in the new community health library, running his hand along the shelves of medical books and health resources available free to anyone who walked through the door. "Thinking about something?" Martin asked gently. Thomas turned, and there was moisture in his eyes. "Just remembering," he said quietly. "There was a night, about 7 years ago now, before I started at Medicorp. Sarah was 13, and she had this terrible flu. Fever wouldn't break, she was getting worse, but I didn't have insurance and I'd already used up my sick days. I remember sitting in that emergency room waiting area for 6 hours, watching doctors rush past to help people who had better coverage, while my baby girl just kept getting sicker." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "Eventually they saw her, and she Was fine, thank God. But I never forgot that feeling of helplessness. Of being invisible because I didn't have the right insurance card or enough money in my bank account. Martin stood quietly, letting Thomas continue. This place, Thomas gestured around the bright, welcoming space, it means nobody has to feel that way. Not in this neighborhood. Parents like I was don't have to choose between paying rent and getting their child's asthma medication. Elderly folks don't have to skip their heart medicine because they can't afford it. You helped build this, Martin said softly. Your story, your perspective, it shaped every decision we made about this facility. Thomas shook his head with characteristic modesty. I just told you what it felt like to struggle. You're the one who chose to do something about it. No, Martin said firmly. We did it together. And that's exactly the point, Thomas. None of us can solve these big problems alone. It takes people being willing to share their truth, and other people being willing to listen and act on it. They walked together through the facility, past examination rooms named after employees who had contributed ideas to the Common Sense Solutions program, past the pharmacy where medications would be provided at cost to those who needed them, past the meeting rooms where community groups could gather for free. In the main waiting area, they found Sarah talking with a young mother and her daughter. The little girl, maybe 7 years old, was clutching a stuffed animal and looking nervous. It's okay, Sarah was saying gently, kneeling down to the child's level. The doctor here is really nice, and they're just going to listen to your breathing, make sure everything sounds good. My dad used to bring me to doctors when I was your age, and I was scared too. But you know what I learned? The people here want to help you feel better. That's all they want. The mother's eyes met Thomas's, and he saw in them the same worry and exhaustion he remembered carrying for so many years. He walked over slowly.